9 years ago, Dr. Robert Harrison, a 46-year-old NASA scientist and father of two, vanished without a trace after leaving the Kennedy Space Center on what appeared to be an ordinary Tuesday evening. His empty car was found the next morning in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner 30 miles from Cape Canaveral, keys still in the ignition, wallet untouched, but Robert was nowhere to be found. The disappearance plunged his wife Sarah and their teenage children into a nightmare of unanswered questions, transforming their suburban home into a shrine of missing person flyers and sleepless nights. The Brevard County Sheriff's Office initially considered several possibilities: voluntary disappearance, foul play, even suicide, but each lead crumbled like sand, leaving the case to grow cold in a filing cabinet while the Harrison family's desperate pleas for answers echoed through empty courtrooms and in different hallways. Before continuing, subscribe and hit the bell. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and proof. Sarah Harrison never stopped believing. While investigators moved on to fresher cases and the media's attention faded like morning fog, she plastered missing person posters across 3 counties, organized search parties that scoured swamplands and abandoned buildings, and confronted anyone who might have seen her husband's last moments. The local community initially rallied around the family. Church groups brought casseroles, neighbors joined search efforts, and Robert's colleagues at NASA established a reward fund. But as months turned to years without progress, that support gradually withered. People stopped asking about Robert. His name disappeared from local news segments. The case file gathered dust. While Sarah Harrison aged a decade in 5 years, her faith tested but never broken, her voice growing hoarse from demanding justice that seemed as distant as the stars her husband once studied. Dr. Harrison had worked in NASA's classified research division for 12 years, specializing in deep space communications and satellite technology. His colleagues described him as brilliant but cautious, a man who followed protocols religiously and never discussed his work outside the secure walls of Kennedy Space Center. He was the type of scientist who arrived early and stayed late, driven by an insatiable curiosity about the cosmos and humanity's place within it. Those who knew Robert best said he lived for discovery, the moment when complex equations revealed universal truths, when years of research crystallized into breakthrough understanding. His dedication to his work was matched only by his devotion to his family, making his sudden disappearance all the more bewildering. Robert Harrison wasn't the type of man to abandon his responsibilities or walk away from his life without explanation. The official investigation hit dead ends almost immediately. Security footage from NASA showed Robert leaving the facility at 6:47 p.m. on March 15, 2015, carrying his usual briefcase and appearing perfectly normal. Traffic cameras captured his Honda Accord heading south on Highway 1, but the trail went cold after Titusville. The diner where his car was discovered had no surveillance system, and none of the staff remembered seeing Robert. His credit cards were never used after that day. His cell phone pinged its last tower signal near the Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge before going dark forever. Detectives interviewed dozens of people, family members, colleagues, neighbors, but found no evidence of financial trouble, marital problems, or enemies who might wish Robert harm. He simply vanished as completely as if he'd been beamed up to one of the spacecraft he helped engineer. Dr. Marcus Chen had shared laboratory space with Robert Harrison for 8 years before the disappearance, and their partnership went beyond professional courtesy. They were friends who trusted each other with classified research and personal struggles alike. Marcus knew Robert's habits, his methodical approach to problem-solving, his terrible coffee-making skills, and his tendency to hum classical music while reviewing data. When Robert failed to show up for an important morning briefing on March 16, 2015, Marcus immediately sensed something was wrong. Robert never missed meetings without calling ahead, never left experiments unfinished, never abandoned protocols midstream. By noon, when security confirmed Robert's badge hadn't been scanned since the previous evening, Marcus was already contacting the police. While investigators pursued conventional leads, Marcus conducted his own investigation within the sterile corridors and secured laboratories of Kennedy Space Center. He knew NASA's bureaucratic maze better than any outside detective, understood which doors required special clearances and which colleagues might possess crucial information. Marcus spent lunch breaks interviewing maintenance staff, security guards, and fellow scientists, piecing together Robert's final days at the facility. He discovered that his friend had been working unusually long hours in the weeks before his disappearance, often staying past midnight in the classified research wing. Building security logs showed Robert accessing restricted databases and archived files that weren't directly related to his current projects, behavior that struck Marcus as distinctly out of character. The more Marcus investigated, the more convinced he became that Robert's disappearance wasn't random. His friend had been methodical in everything, including his final weeks at NASA. Marcus found subtle signs that Robert had been preparing for something: backup drives hidden in unlikely locations, encrypted files saved to multiple servers, research notes written in a code only the two colleagues understood from their graduate school days. It was as if Robert had anticipated his own disappearance and left breadcrumbs for Marcus to follow. But following those breadcrumbs meant navigating NASA's security protocols, institutional secrecy, and the growing suspicion of superiors who viewed Marcus's amateur investigation as inappropriate and potentially dangerous. Years passed, but Marcus never stopped looking. While the official case grew cold and the Harrison family struggled with their loss, Marcus quietly pursued leads that investigators had missed or dismissed. He took vacation days to drive through rural Florida, showing Robert's photograph to gas station attendants and truck stop waitresses. He analyzed his friend's research from the months before the disappearance, looking for connections that might explain why a respected NASA scientist would simply vanish. Marcus's dedication to finding Robert cost him relationships, promotions, and peace of mind. Colleagues began avoiding him, superiors questioned his judgment, and his own family worried about his obsession with a case that everyone else had written off as unsolvable. But Marcus Chen possessed something the official investigators lacked: intimate knowledge of Robert's work and access to classified NASA systems that civilian law enforcement couldn't penetrate. He understood the significance of research protocols, the importance of specific satellite communication projects, and the potential implications of certain classified discoveries. While detectives focused on conventional motives like money, marriage, and mental health, Marcus began uncovering evidence that Robert's disappearance might be connected to something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The question was whether he could prove it before whatever silenced Robert Harrison came for him too. By 2018, 3 years after Robert's disappearance, Marcus Chen had transformed from a respected NASA scientist into something resembling a conspiracy theorist, at least in the eyes of his colleagues and superiors. His office walls were covered with timeline charts, photograph arrays, and classified research summaries that he'd painstakingly reconstructed from fragments Robert had left behind. Marcus had learned to work in shadows, accessing databases during off hours, making copies of files before they could be mysteriously transferred or deleted, and communicating through encrypted channels with anyone willing to discuss Robert's final projects. His transformation from colleague to investigator had been gradual but complete. He thought like a detective now, questioned everything, and trusted no one within NASA's hierarchy. The breakthrough came during a routine server backup recovery in late 2018. Marcus was helping IT technicians restore corrupted data from a system crash when he discovered files that had been automatically archived from Robert's workstation, files that previous investigators had missed, because they were stored under generic research codes rather than Robert's name. Hidden among thousands of routine satellite communication reports, Marcus found evidence that Robert had been investigating discrepancies in classified deep space monitoring data. The files suggested that certain NASA projects weren't what they appeared to be, that satellite networks officially designated for scientific research might have been collecting intelligence that violated international treaties and domestic surveillance laws. Robert's notes, written in the mathematical shorthand he and Marcus had developed in graduate school, revealed a disturbing pattern. Over several months before his disappearance, Robert had documented evidence that NASA's deep space communication arrays were being used to monitor domestic communications traffic, essentially turning space-based scientific instruments into sophisticated surveillance tools without congressional oversight or public knowledge. The implications were staggering. If Robert's analysis was correct, NASA had been operating an illegal domestic spying program disguised as legitimate space research, potentially collecting communications data on American citizens in violation of federal privacy laws. Marcus realized that his friend hadn't simply discovered classified information. Robert had uncovered evidence of systematic government overreach that could destroy careers, trigger congressional investigations, and expose illegal activities reaching into the highest levels of NASA administration. The files showed that Robert had been careful, methodical, and increasingly paranoid in the weeks before his disappearance. He documented security breaches, suspicious meetings between NASA officials and unidentified government agents, and pressure from superiors to falsify research data that might expose the surveillance program's existence. But the most chilling discovery was Robert's final entry, dated March 14, 2015, one day before his disappearance. In encrypted text that took Marcus weeks to decode, Robert wrote, "They know, I know. Copies hidden where only M will find them. If something happens to me, the truth must survive. Sarah deserves answers, but more importantly, the public deserves to know what their government does in darkness." The message was accompanied by a series of numbers that Marcus eventually recognized as coordinates, locations where Robert had hidden additional evidence that could expose the surveillance program and potentially explain his disappearance. Marcus stood at a crossroads that would define the rest of his life. He could take Robert's evidence to law enforcement, but NASA had already demonstrated its ability to control information and influence official investigations. He could leak the documents to journalists, but without Robert alive to verify their authenticity, the files might be dismissed as forgeries or conspiracy theories, or he could continue his own investigation, following the coordinates Robert had left behind and risking whatever fate had befallen his friend. The choice was simple, really. Marcus had spent 3 years looking for answers, and now he was closer to the truth than anyone had been since Robert's disappearance. He couldn't stop now, even if the truth might destroy everything he thought he knew about NASA, the government, and the price of asking too many questions. The first set of coordinates led Marcus to an abandoned lighthouse on the outskirts of New Smyrna Beach, 43 miles south of Kennedy Space Center. Under the cover of a moonless October night in 2018, Marcus drove his Honda through winding coastal roads that seemed to mirror his journey from respected scientist to amateur detective. The lighthouse had been decommissioned for decades, its white paint peeling like old skin, its windows boarded with salt-stained plywood that creaked in the Atlantic wind. Marcus had studied the coordinates for weeks, cross-referencing them with satellite images and property records, but nothing had prepared him for the eerie isolation of the location Robert had chosen for his first cache. Using a GPS device and a high-powered flashlight, Marcus located the precise spot Robert's coordinates indicated, a weathered concrete foundation near the lighthouse's base, partially hidden by decades of overgrown vegetation. Following Robert's methodical nature, Marcus searched systematically until he found what his friend had left behind, a waterproof container buried 18 inches beneath a distinctive piece of driftwood that formed a natural arrow pointing toward the ocean. Inside the container, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic, Marcus discovered a USB drive and a handwritten note that made his hands tremble with recognition of Robert's careful penmanship. The note was brief but devastating. "Marcus, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have been confirmed. The Constellation project isn't what NASA claims. The deep space arrays aren't just monitoring communications, they're actively intercepting and storing data on American citizens. I have proof of direct orders from Deputy Administrator William Crawford to use our satellite network for domestic intelligence gathering. The second cache contains the smoking gun. Trust no one at NASA above Level 7 clearance. Save Sarah the pain if you can, but save the truth no matter what. R.H." Marcus spent the remainder of that night in his car, reviewing the USB drive's contents on his encrypted laptop. The files contained months of Robert's clandestine investigation, including recorded conversations, internal memos, and technical specifications that painted a picture of systematic abuse of NASA's scientific mission. The evidence showed that Deputy Administrator Crawford had been coordinating with unnamed intelligence agencies to repurpose NASA's deep space communication arrays for mass surveillance of domestic communications traffic. What the public believed was cutting-edge space exploration technology was actually functioning as the most sophisticated domestic spying apparatus ever created. But the most disturbing revelation was Robert's discovery of the program's code name, Operation Icarus. The mythological reference wasn't lost on Marcus. Like the Greek figure who flew too close to the sun, Robert had apparently discovered something so dangerous that it had burned him away entirely. The USB drive contained evidence that Robert had tried to approach his immediate supervisor, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, about the surveillance program in February 2015. According to Robert's notes, Dr. Walsh had promised to investigate his concerns, but had instead reported directly to Crawford. Within days of that meeting, Robert began documenting increased security attention, restricted access to certain systems, and what he described as aggressive surveillance of my personal activities. The timeline suggested that reporting his discovery through official channels had sealed Robert's fate. The second set of coordinates proved more challenging to reach. Robert had chosen Canaveral National Seashore, a protected wilderness area where public access was limited and security cameras were non-existent. Marcus waited for a weekend when NASA schedules would provide him with legitimate reasons to be in the area, then drove to the coordinates during the early morning hours, when ranger patrols were least likely. The location was precise but cryptic, a specific GPS point in the middle of seemingly empty scrubland, marked only by native vegetation and the distant sound of ocean waves beyond the dunes. Following Robert's pattern, Marcus searched methodically until he found the marker his friend had left. 3 pieces of driftwood arranged in a triangle, weathered but still distinct from the natural debris scattered throughout the area. The second cache was buried deeper than the first, requiring Marcus to dig nearly 3 feet through sandy soil before his shovel struck the hard plastic of another waterproof container. This one was larger, heavier, and when Marcus opened it beneath the Florida sunrise, he discovered why Robert had chosen such an isolated location to hide its contents. Inside the container, Marcus found a collection of evidence that would have destroyed careers and triggered congressional investigations if Robert had lived to present it. The cache contained printed copies of classified emails between Deputy Administrator Crawford and officials at the National Security Agency, detailing the technical specifications and operational parameters of the domestic surveillance program. More damaging still were audio recordings that Robert had secretly made of meetings where Crawford explicitly discussed using NASA's scientific mission as cover for intelligence gathering that violated federal privacy laws and international treaties governing space-based communications. The smoking gun was a single document that Marcus recognized immediately, a presidential daily brief summary that Crawford had somehow obtained, showing that the surveillance program had been approved at the highest levels of government without congressional oversight or judicial review. The document, classified at levels that should have been impossible for NASA personnel to access, proved that Operation Icarus was a joint project between NASA, the NSA, and what the brief referred to only as related intelligence agencies. Robert had somehow penetrated security protocols that were designed to prevent exactly this kind of disclosure, and the evidence suggested he'd been building an airtight case that would have exposed the entire operation. But the most chilling discovery in the second cache was a series of photographs that Robert had taken using long-range surveillance equipment. The images showed Crawford meeting with unidentified individuals in locations far from NASA facilities, a parking garage in Orlando, a beach house in Cocoa Beach, a private airfield where corporate jets landed without filing flight plans. Robert's accompanying notes indicated that he'd been conducting counter-surveillance against his own supervisors, documenting meetings that weren't reflected in any official NASA schedules or travel records. The final photograph, dated March 13, 2015, just 2 days before Robert's disappearance, showed Crawford shaking hands with a man whose face was partially obscured, but whose bearing suggested military or intelligence background. Marcus realized that Robert hadn't just discovered evidence of illegal surveillance, he'd uncovered an entire shadow network operating within NASA's legitimate scientific mission. The evidence suggested that Crawford and his associates had been using their positions to facilitate intelligence operations that extended far beyond the Constellation project, possibly involving the transfer of sensitive space technology to unauthorized recipients. As Marcus carefully repacked the evidence and prepared to leave Canaveral National Seashore, he understood that his friend had died, not just because he'd discovered government overreach, but because he'd stumbled upon what appeared to be systematic treason disguised as patriotic duty. If this case has gripped you already, hit that like button. It helps Dr. Robert Harrison's story reach more people. Marcus Chen's discovery of Robert's evidence caches should have felt like vindication, but instead it brought a creeping paranoia that transformed every routine interaction into a potential threat. By November 2018, Marcus had begun noticing subtle changes in his work environment that echoed the surveillance patterns Robert had documented before his disappearance. Security badge readers seemed to track his movements more frequently, requiring multiple scans where once had been sufficient. IT support requests that had previously taken days to fulfill were now addressed within hours, with technicians who asked probing questions about his research and computer usage. Most disturbing of all, Marcus discovered that his office computer was being remotely accessed during off hours, with system logs showing unauthorized review of his files and internet browsing history. The watchers were professional, but not invisible to someone who knew what signs to look for. Marcus began documenting his own surveillance, using techniques Robert's notes had taught him, photographing the same vehicles parked near his apartment building on consecutive days, memorizing the faces of security personnel who appeared too frequently in his peripheral vision, noting the subtle changes in his colleagues' behavior that suggested they'd been instructed to monitor and report on his activities. The pattern was insidious but unmistakable. Marcus was being assessed as a potential security risk, just as Robert had been in the weeks before his disappearance. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Robert's former supervisor, requested a meeting with Marcus in early December 2018, ostensibly to discuss his current research projects, but actually to probe how much he knew about his missing colleague's final activities. Walsh's questions were carefully phrased to seem routine, but Marcus recognized the interrogation techniques from law enforcement training manuals he'd studied while investigating Robert's case. She asked about Robert's state of mind before the disappearance, whether he'd shared concerns about work stress or personal problems, and most tellingly, whether Robert had left behind any research materials that Marcus might have overlooked. Marcus provided carefully neutral responses while internally cataloguing every detail of Walsh's behavior, from her nervous fidgeting to her repeated glances toward the office door as if expecting interruption. The meeting confirmed Marcus's growing suspicion that Walsh had been compromised from the beginning of Robert's investigation. Her nervous energy, her leading questions, and her obvious discomfort suggested someone operating under external pressure rather than genuine concern for a missing colleague. Marcus realized that Walsh's promise to investigate Robert's concerns about the surveillance program had been a trap, a way to identify exactly how much Robert knew and how much evidence he might have gathered. The betrayal was particularly painful because Marcus had trusted Walsh, had even considered approaching her with Robert's evidence before discovering her role in his friend's downfall. That night, Marcus made a decision that would define the remainder of his investigation. Instead of continuing to work within NASA's compromised system, he would take Robert's evidence outside the agency and find allies who couldn't be influenced by Deputy Administrator Crawford or his associates. But first, he needed to retrieve the final cache Robert had hidden, the one whose coordinates were encoded in the most complex mathematical sequence his friend had ever created. Marcus spent weeks decrypting the location, working only during off hours and using computers that couldn't be monitored by NASA's security systems. When he finally solved Robert's puzzle, the coordinates pointed to a location that made perfect sense, given his friend's methodical nature: the abandoned Titan rocket facility at Cape Canaveral, a place where Robert had worked during his early career and where security was minimal enough to allow clandestine activity. The third cache would either provide the final pieces of Robert's investigation or reveal the full scope of the conspiracy that had cost his friend's life. But as Marcus prepared for what might be his last night as a NASA employee, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was following exactly the same path that had led to Robert's disappearance. The difference, he hoped, was that he now understood the stakes. And unlike Robert, Marcus Chen had no intention of facing the truth alone. The abandoned Titan rocket facility stood like a monument to forgotten ambitions, its concrete launch towers reaching toward a star-filled sky that had witnessed humanity's greatest triumphs and most devastating failures. Marcus Chen arrived at the coordinates Robert had encrypted using their shared mathematical language, driving through rusted gates that hadn't been secured in years. The facility had been decommissioned in the early 2000s, leaving behind a landscape of empty buildings, stripped infrastructure, and the ghostly silence of dreams abandoned. It was here, among the remnants of America's space program, that Robert Harrison had chosen to hide his most dangerous discovery. Following the precise coordinates decoded from Robert's final message, Marcus navigated through the facility's maze of concrete structures until he reached Launch Pad 40B, where Robert had spent his early career preparing payloads for deep space missions. The coordinates led to a maintenance shed that had been overlooked during the facility's decommissioning, its metal walls corroded by years of salt air and neglect. Inside the shed, Marcus found Robert's most elaborate hiding place, a floor panel that had been carefully modified to conceal a waterproof container large enough to hold what appeared to be Robert's entire investigation. The final cache contained evidence that exceeded even Marcus's darkest suspicions about the scope of Operation Icarus. Along with additional technical documentation and recorded conversations, Robert had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Deputy Administrator Crawford that revealed connections to defense contractors, foreign intelligence services, and a network of NASA officials who had been systematically compromising the agency's scientific mission for personal gain. The documents showed that Crawford hadn't just authorized domestic surveillance, he had been selling access to NASA's satellite network to the highest bidders, including governments and corporations that had no legal right to American space-based intelligence capabilities. But the most shocking discovery was a video recording that Robert had made using hidden surveillance equipment in Crawford's office. The footage, dated March 12, 2015, just 3 days before Robert's disappearance, showed Crawford in conversation with two unidentified men who were clearly not NASA personnel. The audio quality was poor, but Marcus could make out enough of the conversation to understand that Crawford was discussing the Harrison problem and the need for permanent solutions to security breaches. One of the men, whose voice carried a distinctive accent that Marcus couldn't place, repeatedly referenced the client's concerns and the importance of maintaining operational security at all costs. The final item in Robert's cache was a letter addressed specifically to Marcus, written in his friend's careful handwriting and dated March 14, 2015, the day before his disappearance. The letter revealed that Robert had become aware of the surveillance targeting him and had suspected that his time was running out. "Marcus," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then they've silenced me as I feared they would. But they cannot silence the truth, and they cannot silence you if you're smart about how you proceed. I've given you everything you need to expose Operation Icarus and bring justice for what they've done to our agency, our country, and our Constitution. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't trust anyone inside NASA. Take the evidence to people who can't be bought or intimidated. Make them pay for what they did to Sarah and the children. Make them pay for turning our dreams of exploring the cosmos into a nightmare of domestic oppression." Marcus Chen spent the winter of 2018 carefully planning his next moves, understanding that Robert's fate awaited anyone who approached the evidence carelessly or trusted the wrong people. Instead of working within NASA's compromised hierarchy, Marcus reached out to investigative journalists who specialized in government accountability, congressional staffers who had shown interest in intelligence oversight, and FBI agents whose careers weren't dependent on maintaining good relationships with NASA leadership. He leaked Robert's evidence gradually, strategically, ensuring that multiple independent sources would be investigating Operation Icarus simultaneously and making it impossible for Crawford and his associates to suppress the story. The breakthrough came in February 2019, when Washington Post investigative reporter Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname, published the first in a series of articles that would eventually bring down the entire conspiracy. Chen had spent months verifying Robert's evidence, cross-referencing the documents with her own sources within the intelligence community and government oversight agencies. Her initial story, headlined "NASA Scientists' Hidden Evidence Exposes Illegal Surveillance Program," triggered immediate congressional hearings, FBI investigations, and a media firestorm that Crawford and his associates couldn't control or contain. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Robert Harrison's final discovery and the reasons for his murder. For murder it clearly was, despite the lack of a body or crime scene. FBI forensic accountants traced millions of dollars in payments from foreign governments and defense contractors to offshore accounts controlled by Crawford and a network of NASA officials who had been selling access to America's space-based surveillance capabilities. The investigation revealed that Operation Icarus had generated enormous profits for its participants while compromising national security and violating the constitutional rights of American citizens on a massive scale. Deputy Administrator William Crawford was arrested at his Virginia home in March 2019, along with Dr. Jennifer Walsh and 6 other NASA officials who had participated in the conspiracy. During the raids that accompanied the arrests, FBI agents discovered evidence that confirmed Marcus's worst fears about Robert's fate. Hidden in Crawford's personal safe, investigators found Robert's NASA identification badge, his wedding ring, and a detailed plan for disposing of security threats that included specific references to the abandoned limestone quarries in central Florida, where industrial waste had been illegally dumped for decades. The search of the quarries took 3 weeks and involved underwater recovery teams, ground-penetrating radar, and forensic specialists who had worked on some of America's most challenging missing person cases. On April 15, 2019, 4 years and 1 month after Robert Harrison had vanished from the Kennedy Space Center parking lot, divers recovered human remains from the deepest section of a flooded quarry 40 miles inland from Cape Canaveral. Dental records confirmed what Marcus Chen and Sarah Harrison had never stopped believing. Robert Harrison had been murdered because he discovered the truth about Operation Icarus and refused to stay silent about systematic corruption within NASA. The trial of William Crawford and his co-conspirators became one of the most closely watched federal prosecutions of the decade, drawing international attention to the abuse of space-based technology for illegal surveillance and the murder of a scientist who had tried to expose the truth. Marcus Chen testified as the prosecution's key witness, describing his 4-year investigation and the evidence Robert had hidden throughout Florida's Space Coast. Sarah Harrison, appearing publicly for the first time since her husband's disappearance, delivered victim impact testimony that brought the courtroom to silence as she described the years of uncertainty, the children who had grown up without their father, and the systematic gaslighting by officials who had known from the beginning what had happened to Robert. Crawford was convicted on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to violations of the Espionage Act, receiving a life sentence without possibility of parole. Dr. Jennifer Walsh received 30 years for her role in the conspiracy and the cover-up that followed Robert's murder. The other NASA officials involved in Operation Icarus received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years, effectively ending their careers and sending a clear message about the consequences of betraying the public trust. More importantly for the Harrison family, the convictions provided official acknowledgement of Robert's heroism and vindication of the investigation that had cost him his life. The broader impact of Robert's posthumous investigation extended far beyond the criminal prosecutions. Congressional hearings led to comprehensive reforms of NASA's security protocols, oversight of classified research programs, and protection for whistleblowers who discovered evidence of illegal activities within the agency. The Constellation project was permanently discontinued, its technology transferred to civilian oversight agencies that would ensure space-based communication systems could never again be used for unauthorized domestic surveillance. Robert's sacrifice had not only exposed a dangerous conspiracy, but had also strengthened the legal and institutional safeguards designed to prevent similar abuses in the future. Marcus Chen left NASA in 2020, unable to continue working for an agency that had facilitated his friend's murder, but his departure marked the beginning of a new career as an advocate for scientific integrity and government accountability. He established the Robert Harrison Foundation, dedicated to protecting researchers who discover evidence of institutional corruption and ensuring that the pursuit of scientific truth can never again be silenced by those who would abuse their authority. Sarah Harrison remarried in 2021, finding love again while maintaining her commitment to her first husband's memory and the principles he had died defending. On the 5th anniversary of Robert's body being recovered, Marcus Chen returned to the abandoned Titan facility, where his friend had hidden the evidence that would eventually bring justice. Standing among the rusted launch towers beneath the same stars that Robert had spent his career studying, Marcus reflected on the price of truth and the importance of never abandoning those who risk everything to expose corruption. Robert Harrison had paid the ultimate price for his integrity, but his sacrifice had ensured that future scientists could pursue their research without fear of those who would silence inconvenient discoveries. The case of Dr. Robert Harrison became a landmark in the history of whistleblower protection and scientific integrity, proving that even the most sophisticated cover-ups cannot ultimately suppress the truth when dedicated people refuse to give up their search for justice. 4 years after Robert's disappearance, his hidden evidence had exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government, brought his killers to justice, and ensured that his sacrifice would protect future generations of scientists who dare to speak truth to power. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases throughout America. Thank you for following Dr. Robert Harrison's story. See you in the next video. 7 years have passed since Dr. Robert Harrison's remains were recovered from that flooded quarry in central Florida, and the ripples of his courage continue to spread across the scientific community like waves expanding through the cosmic void he once studied. The Kennedy Space Center has been transformed by the reforms his sacrifice made possible. New oversight committees ensure that classified research serves the public interest. Whistleblower protections have been strengthened beyond recognition, and the culture of silence that once protected corruption has been replaced by an institutional commitment to transparency and accountability. Sarah Harrison, now Sarah Martinez, stands in the visitor center at Kennedy Space Center on a humid Tuesday morning in 2026, watching her teenage daughter Emma read the memorial plaque dedicated to her father's memory. The inscription is simple but powerful. Dr. Robert Harrison, 1969-2015, scientist, father, truth seeker. His courage to expose corruption ensured that the pursuit of knowledge would never again be silenced by those who would abuse their authority. Emma has grown up knowing her father as a hero rather than a victim, understanding that his death, while tragic, had meaning and purpose that extended far beyond their family's personal loss. Marcus Chen, now director of the Robert Harrison Foundation, visits the memorial every year on the anniversary of his friend's disappearance. He has spent the past 7 years working to protect other scientists who have discovered evidence of institutional corruption, providing legal support, security assistance, and financial resources to researchers whose integrity has made them targets. The Foundation has handled 43 cases since its establishment, successfully protecting whistleblowers in fields ranging from climate science to pharmaceutical research to defense technology. None of these cases has resulted in another murder, a testament to the deterrent effect of Robert's posthumous victory over those who thought they could silence the truth. The abandoned Titan facility where Robert hid his final cache has been converted into a memorial park and educational center, its rusted launch towers now supporting solar panels that power a research station dedicated to studying space-based communications technology for peaceful purposes only. Visitors to the park can walk the same paths Robert Harrison once traveled, see displays explaining how satellite technology should serve humanity's exploration of the cosmos rather than government's surveillance of their own citizens, and understand the price that some scientists pay to ensure that knowledge serves justice rather than power. William Crawford died in federal prison in 2024, serving less than 5 years of his life sentence before suffering a heart attack that many viewed as cosmic justice for the man who had ordered Robert Harrison's murder. Dr. Jennifer Walsh remains incarcerated, her requests for early release consistently denied by parole boards that recognize the continuing danger she would pose to scientific integrity if released. The other conspirators have served their sentences in relative obscurity, their names forever associated with one of the most significant betrayals of scientific trust in American history. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of Robert Harrison's sacrifice is visible in the behavior of current NASA scientists, who understand that their colleagues' death purchased their freedom to pursue research without fear of political interference or institutional corruption. The agency that once silenced Robert Harrison now proudly displays his photograph in its headquarters, alongside other heroes who advanced human knowledge despite facing persecution from those who preferred comfortable lies to dangerous truths. On clear nights, when the Florida sky reveals the same stars Robert Harrison spent his career studying, Sarah Martinez sometimes takes her daughter to Cocoa Beach to watch NASA launches carry new missions toward the cosmos. Emma asks questions about her father's work, about the satellites that now serve peaceful exploration rather than illegal surveillance, about the scientists who continue his legacy of integrity in laboratories and research stations around the world. Sarah tells her daughter that Robert's spirit travels with every mission that seeks knowledge rather than power, truth rather than control, hope rather than fear. Marcus Chen often joins them on these evening vigils, sharing stories about the friend who paid the ultimate price to ensure that science would serve humanity's highest aspirations rather than its darkest impulses. Together, they watch rockets carrying legitimate research payloads disappear into the darkness beyond Earth's atmosphere, knowing that Robert Harrison's sacrifice made it possible for those missions to launch free from the corruption that once perverted NASA's noble purpose. The stars that Robert Harrison studied during his life now serve as eternal witnesses to the truth he died protecting. In the vast cosmos that dwarfs human ambition and renders temporal power meaningless, his courage echoes across the light years as a reminder that some principles are worth defending regardless of the personal cost. The universe keeps its secrets for eons, but eventually, like Robert's hidden evidence, even the most carefully buried truths find their way to the surface. In the end, the cosmos remembers those who sought truth among the stars and forgets those who buried it in Florida soil.